Welcome once again to the Concacast with John Arnold. I'm John Arnold. Thanks so much for those of you who have supported the show after 2 episodes. Hope you like and subscribe and tell your friends about the show as we go into episode 3. In episode 3, we'll have 3 segments for you. The big story, the interview with Paul Tenorio looking ahead to the 2025 MLS season, which kicks off this weekend, and some commentary as MLS turns 30. An MLS-centric edition of the show. MLS is CONCACAF, even if often we don't include it or I let other people take the lead covering that league. But we are going to talk a fair amount about MLS after the big story. And the big story this week, Messi is cold. I'm cold too. Everywhere in the US seems to be cold, and this is a very cold time in our country. But it's Lionel Messi's cold that is getting the attention because Inter Miami's visit to Sporting Kansas City was postponed by CONCACAF by 24 hours, creating a bit of a storm for all of us who follow this competition as we have 4 matches taking place on Wednesday. There's been a lot of debate about whether or not the right decision was made to postpone this game. I think everyone agrees that the decision made with player safety or fan safety in mind is a good one. Sometimes these decisions have to be made, even if it would be better, TV-wise, fan experience outside of Kansas City-wise, for these games to go off as played. But while the cold temperatures will persist, I think the big issue is the potential for snowfall. We'll see what things look like in the LA-Colorado game, which you've already watched by the time that you're watching this video. But overall, I think that CONCACAF probably made the right decision here. Clearly, local stakeholders wanted things to change. And look, if Inter Miami had a say too, they should. Every team should be able to have a say into what they feel like is the most competitive atmosphere, to what they feel like is a safe atmosphere. Overall, I think the big thing that I'll be watching for this week is simply MLS team's performance, especially a team like Herediano facing Real Salt Lake. That could be a spoiler. Herediano is the Costa Rican champion. They haven't lost in 2025, and Real Salt Lake is a team that hasn't been able to play competitive matches yet. This is the classic story in this competition of MLS teams going in without matches, without rhythm, and seeing what they can do against a team that's been playing together for a while, that has a lot of players with chips on their shoulders who maybe had MLS experiences or trials and didn't stick. They want to prove that they belong, that they can topple MLS teams, not just Herediano, but other teams in the region. And remember, just 2 weeks ago, we were talking about Mexican teams falling short, about Tigres losing in Real Estelí, about Chivas getting a draw in the Dominican Republic, about Pumas losing in Canada. And while all 3 of those teams eventually were able to advance from their ties, the bullying, the laughing that MLS fans were able to do, pointing a finger at Mexican teams, could be pointed right back at them this week. That's the nature of this competition, and in some ways, that's its beauty. Let's go into the interview with Paul Tenorio. As I mentioned, we're talking about the 2025 MLS season, both some of what's going to happen on the field, but also what's going on off the field. Hope you enjoy this interview with Paul Tenorio, learn something from it. We'll talk on the other side.
We're now joined by Paul Tenorio, senior writer with The Athletic, and someone who's also writing a book about the Messi effect on Major League Soccer. Paul joins us from Chicago. I have to imagine the weather is amazing there, Paul. I noticed you're wearing a sweater and inside, but you want to give us a live report from the snow?
Well, it's wind chill of negative 25 degrees this morning, so thus the sweater. I'm still trying to warm up from school drop off with the kids. Yeah, lovely here in February in Chicago.
I still think MLS should switch the schedule, mostly to make Northwesterners, North and Midwesterners like yourself suffer. But we'll get to that in a minute, unless this is your biggest story, because I wanted to ask you, as the 2025 MLS season approaches, it feels like this big moment, 30 years of Major League Soccer, a league that you and I have watched grow since we were kids, that other people have kind of seen through the whole process as well. Some people, of course, are new fans, maybe just popping into the Apple TV deal with their T-Mobile Tuesday this week. For you, as someone who looks at both the on-field product and what's going on around the league in a business sense, as you look toward 2025, what do you feel like is the biggest off-field story in the league this year?
It's a very obvious one. It's what is the league going to do to take advantage of 2026? We still don't know that yet. The World Cup is coming to the United States for the first time since 1994. The last time the World Cup came, it created Major League Soccer, right? Like, this league exists because the U.S. hosted the 1994 World Cup. And for a long time, the league talked about 2026 as this critical moment, this potential jumping point for the league to go into this next phase of growth. Now they're sort of downplaying it. They're like, oh, we don't need to do something necessarily around 2026. That's a very romantic idea, but it's not necessarily tied to it. I think that's a bit silly, right? We know that the eyeballs are going to go up after the World Cup. People are going to be more interested in the sport. They're going to look for a place to watch the sport. How does MLS take advantage of that? You've got Messi in the league now. You haven't really done that much to change the league, though I would say obviously the internal transfer market I think was a bigger change. What do you do to convince people that MLS is different than what they think it is? And I'm not talking about the diehard MLS fans who know this league for, the great things about it and the terrible things about it. I'm talking about the casual sports fan who's going to say, all right, that was really cool going to the World Cup. Why should I go to MLS? It's not the best players in the world. What do you do to change that perception around the league? That is something that's being decided right now. And it's something I'm reporting out from my book. I mean, these conversations have been ongoing for several years now. We don't know where they're going to lead. Will they flip the calendar? Will they change the roster rules? Will they do something drastic to say, hey, we are not the MLS of the 2000s, even 2000 to 2010 when Beckham showed up? We are not the MLS of this most recent form of expansion. We are a new MLS. That, for me, is the story around the league this year and in 2026.
It is a romantic idea, but 'tis the season. I think many MLS fans would like to see the league sort of fall in love with trying to capture these new fans to try and bring in more people. We talked about you being in Chicago. That's a market that for me has always stuck out. A great sports town, so much passion for teams that aren't the Chicago Fire, but it seems like the Fire have never broken through. What do you see this year as Greg Berhalter is leading the way? There's an owner who's not shy about spending money. There's talk about maybe even another venue down the road in the future. But looking at this year specifically as Berhalter tries to turn things around, where do you see your local club?
I think they're going to be better for sure. You look at the starting lineup and it has improved. There was a lot wrong with the roster the last couple of years. They needed to move a lot of pieces off the team. They did that this offseason. That was, I think, as important, maybe more important than the additions they brought in. Obviously, adding a DP winger and Jonathan Bamba was a big move for the Fire, but they still have an open DP slot. They still have open U22 positions. There's still more coming to this team. I just think that they needed to increase they needed to up the floor. Like let's worry about the ceiling later. Let's get more quality on this team in general. They've done that for sure. Where will they be? I don't know. I could see them as like a 6th, 7th place team in the East. We'll see who they add to this roster later on, but the floor is higher, and that was really important for the first year of Greg Berhalter.
I often kind of, not in my personal life, but in my coverage, things like the Concacast, the Getting Concacaf newsletter, kind of ignore MLS because people like you and your team at The Athletic and people at other outlets that we know and love do a great job covering the league. But if someone is like me and their entry point to soccer is weird CONCACAF stuff, they want to know what's going on in Belize. They want to know what's happening in the Canadian Premier League. They're into women's soccer in El Salvador. Help people like me get that entry point into MLS. What's the most CONCACAF-y storyline that we have going on this year, whether it be in the Concacaf Champions Cup, as we see Lionel Messi and company enter, potentially going to a place like Jamaica, play Cavalier? Is it that? Is it something else? What's the most CONCACAF-y storyline?
You know what? I think this year, maybe the most CONCACAF storyline is in San Jose, Bruce
All right.
Arena. Like, this is a guy who is, one of the all-time winningest coaches in MLS history, coached the U.S. national team, somebody familiar to any fan in CONCACAF. And he exited MLS in a really kind of weird, bizarre way. He was suspended and resigned from New England. No one really knows exactly why. The results of the investigation from MLS were never made public. And then he kind of reappears now in San Jose with complete control. And I think anyone who follows this league knows, like, you don't bet against Bruce Arena. I mean, even when you think he can't do it again, he does it again. In New England, he won a supporter shield with the team that was the worst in the league. Well, he's taking over another team that was the worst in the league. And he's basically like just taking everyone he had in New England a few years ago and bringing them into San Jose. Like, how CONCACAF is that? He's like, there's no glitz or glamour to this. He's like finding a bunch of old names from around the league. It kind of reminds me of Alajuelense in Costa Rica. You start grabbing some
I
old
knew we couldn't get through this without you mentioning Liga.
La Liga. they went and grabbed a bunch of recognizable names, but like it worked, right? When they first
Yes.
brought the big names back, it worked. And everyone was like, "Oh, this team's going to be too old." It was like, "No." Well, like that's how I feel is like what's happening in San Jose right now. It's like this team is old. Is Joseph Martinez the Joseph Martinez of Atlanta United? No. Like, is Arango going to do what he did at RSL or LAFC? I don't know. We'll see. A bunch of these guys he's bringing from New England, and I'm going to predict they're going to make the playoffs because I don't bet against Bruce Arena. Like, I think that this is kind of an experiment of like, we talk all the time, like MLS is getting better, it's growing. Like, Bruce is like, all right, well, I still know what MLS is. And like, I don't care if this guy's old, if this guy's been hurt, like, he's good in this league. I'm going to make it work. And I think it's kind of like a grand experiment here. It's like Bruce Arena always kind of does it. He like dares you to bet against him and he puts together this team that's ragtag and then he wins with it. And so that's kind of what I think is like Concacaf about this season.
From our most sicko storyline to the most basic and mainstream, let's close out talking a little bit about Lionel Messi, a guy that you have become well acquainted with the last several years as you dig in for the research about a book, not about him, but about the business and how he's changing American soccer. What do you think we'll see from him on the field this year? I think 2024 was sort of easy to analyze. We said, oh, Copa America is going to be very important for him. It was. He prioritized that. And then, yes, there was a league trophy in the Supporters Shield, but ultimately Inter Miami fell short. Where are Messi's priorities this year? And what do you kind of expect to see from him in what's going to be a very long year, starting as we talk on February 19th and then going, they hope, until December?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Messi is he definitely does kind of prioritize things. He knows what's important. He asks like, okay, where are we putting our value here, right? So one thing I would expect is for him and Inter Miami to take the CONCACAF Champions Cup very seriously. It's quite a prestigious trophy. Only one MLS team has ever won it, and they're in the competition again. And I think they have a favorable path theoretically to a
Yeah.
championship, right? So I would expect Messi and Inter Miami to prioritize that over anything else at the start of the season. They've already won the Supporter Shield. So finishing atop the table in MLS again, it's not really, as sexy this time around. Winning the Champions Cup is, and I think we know the Club World Cup, like Inter Miami, Seattle, they're outmatched compared to the competition in that tournament. You can't really say that's our goal to win that trophy. Certainly you want to make a good impression, but you have to have kind of a realistic understanding of what a team is capable of from MLS in that tournament. So I expect him to prioritize the Champions Cup. I think if they don't go far in that tournament, it's going to be considered a massive failure and a huge disappointment in Miami. And then I think they learned from the MLS playoffs. So I think you'll see kind of post Champions Cup a mindset of let's get this team ready for the playoffs. Let's find our rhythm at the end of the season and really prioritize that part of it. But it is interesting with Messi because this is his kind of first full season where there isn't something kind of random happening, right? Like he arrived in MLS in the summer. He had half a season, really just won an in-season tournament and then was injured for the back end of the year. Last year, the Copa America broke up the season significantly for him. He only played, I think, 19 games. Obviously, was the MVP, super productive. But he's got the full gamut of MLS this year, and they're in all of the competitions, basically. So, how he navigates his health with an eye towards the playoffs and the Champions Cup, I think is going to be worth watching. But yeah, for me, I think the Messi effect should never be just about what he does on the field. It's got to be bigger than that if it's going to be considered a success.
Well, tell me more about that. I know that's the topic of your book. Authors are hitting us up all the time on the Concacast after 2 episodes. Hey, we want the Concacast bump. That's why you're on this show.
Yep.
No, you're here to chat, but give us a little bit of a plug and what can people look forward to from the book that you've got coming out about the business effect of Lionel Messi?
Yeah, this book is more than just about the behind the scenes of Messi coming to America. And it has some of the moments behind the scenes with Messi and what it's like when the greatest player of all time lands in an MLS locker room. Certainly, it created some cool moments for the players that were there. A lot of change had to happen at Inter Miami and in MLS to deal with Messi's arrival. But this sport is growing so much and has grown so much, and we're in an unprecedented time for the sport in the United States. I mean, you've got Messi coming, which was a runway into the Copa America in 24, the Club World Cup in 25, the World Cup in 26. And MLS really only plays a small part in that growth, right? When we talk about the popularity of soccer in this country, you have to look outside of just MLS. The Premier League coming to NBC in 2012 was transformative. And obviously the summer tours that happened as a result of that allowed people to see big name stars in their backyard. The relevant lawsuit could potentially change that even further, change the business dynamics for Liga MX as well. If they can suddenly start to play regular season games in the United States, as the Mexican national team has taken advantage with friendlies, as Liga MX has with Leagues Cup, could we see that dynamic continue to change? But I think also the growth of the sport is about things like Welcome to Wrexham, which has resonated with a completely different audience and introduced them to the history and romanticism of pro rel and the sport overseas. You've got even Ted Lasso, which during the pandemic became a touch point for some people into soccer. All of these different things, the Champions League on CBS, the studio show, as we change the way we view soccer, as it becomes more digital and streaming, and you have people consuming it in clips on Instagram and finding ways to connect to the game. All of this stuff is happening all at once in the United States. And what is that going to look like after the World Cup? How is this sport going to grow? What is MLS going to do to claim a bigger piece of it? And how much are we going to see teams overseas continue to reach into this market to expand their impact commercially? And what does that do to the landscape? I don't think this is the end of FIFA holding big events here. I don't think it's the last time we'll see a Copa America or a tournament like that. I do think it's a matter of time before you see something like a Champions League final or a Premier League regular season game. All of these things are impacting the business. And, it leaves leagues like the NWSL, MLS, League MX really having to ask questions about what are we going to do to adapt our business in order to kind of keep our foothold, maybe even increase our audience here in the United States when all this competition exists right now on television, but more and more and more in American backyards, in stadiums around the country.
Well, where can we buy your book when it comes out? Plug your book. What are we
Yeah,
supposed to do to get that Concacast bump? Should we pre-order on Amazon?
Hopefully
Go
you
to
can.
a publisher webpage?
Well, we're not pre-ordering yet, but the book will be out in May of 2026. The book is scheduled to come out in May of 2026. So hopefully soon I can get a pre-order link out there. I'll come back on the Concacast. I'll have a cup of coffee next time. We'll bring it all together. Maybe we'll do it live somewhere, somewhere that CONCACAF takes us, the Nations League or CONCACAF Champions Cup, where you and I usually look for a Costa Rican restaurant together and share a cup of coffee.
Thanks again to Paul Tenorio for joining. And of course, I know we'll give him that CONCACAST bump when the pre-order link for his book is available. I wanted to close today by talking about the state of MLS. The World Soccer magazine asked me to do a bit of a reflective on MLS as it goes into its 30th year. When we talk about turning 30 as people, we're often talking about maturity, reaching a certain level of growth, having some of the bad decisions or partying out of our system, but not yet over the hill. It's an interesting time where you can sort of reshape yourself. Many people become parents in their 30s or take on a new job or project. MLS, obviously, as a soccer league, isn't going to do those types of things, but the direction the league takes is constantly being evaluated. In fact, as I wrote in World Soccer, I feel like it may be the most analyzed league from a business perspective ever. And you can understand why. Soccer fans who can remember the North American Soccer League had something they loved, had something they supported, and then saw it crumble before their eyes because of bad business decisions. MLS itself, when you speak with Don Garber, the commissioner, or certain owners talk about the difficulties they had in the 2000, 2001, 2002 period, and there were times where MLS's continuity didn't seem at all certain. It wasn't at all certain from a financial perspective. Now I think we're past that. I think that no matter whether or not you like watching MLS and consuming the product, or you don't, or you think the Apple deal is a good one or not, MLS is here to stay. And that's significant, that's important, and it's in a good place business-wise. I was looking at some headlines from around Europe. I saw this one. Belgian clubs continue to bleed red ink, racking up 160 million euros of losses in 2024. I've been reading about the situation for Ligue 1 in France, the dispute they have with the zone, rights payments not being paid out, clubs having to dip into emergency funds in order to keep operations going normally. We don't generally love soccer for these types of stories, TV rights or business deals, money. But if we don't have that aspect of the sport, it doesn't survive. And of course, we're well aware of that in the US. And yet, it seems that MLS is in a good point. It is a league that's going to have continuity. There are people that love the sport. There are fans that fill the stadiums. As Paul Tenorio mentioned, yes, there's more that needs to be done. What is the league going to do to capitalize off 2026? What is the league going to do to capitalize off Messi? So far, it seems to me that it's been excitement that Messi is here and not necessarily a plan about how they're going to keep those fans loving MLS after Messi leaves. But while there's plenty of things to pick at and talk about and debate, and those are fun things to have, I think it's worth taking a step back and evaluating MLS at 30 as a product that exists and will continue to exist. Again, maybe you like the direction it's going, maybe you don't, but what American fans can enjoy, what Canadian fans can enjoy, is a first division league of men's soccer that is going to survive, that is going to keep going, that so far is in a mode of near consistent growth. At some point, you do have to stop having so many markets. At some point, you do have to stop depending on these big time expansion fees. But the fact that these ownership groups are willing to pay fees, while Belgian soccer and French soccer and soccer in leagues in other places around the world is a losing money proposition, I think shows just how much ambition and optimism there is in the US. Sure, be cynical about that. It might not be a good thing for the fan, but it is a good thing for fans to have a league that's going to continue on, that they can keep watching. Hopefully for those fans, the teams can compete in Concacaf Champions Cup, can become better on the field, that some of these salary restrictions are loosened so they can be teams that compete in the Club World Cup and other big competitions that we're going to be watching and enjoying. But the fact that US teams are going to be in those competitions, and it doesn't seem like anytime soon we're headed for a future where there aren't local teams to support, where there aren't clubs to cheer for, where there isn't growth and development being done in almost every market around the US, it's something to celebrate. So happy 30th birthday, MLS, just like almost everyone whose birthday we're celebrating. I have plenty of flaws we'll pick at, but I think it's worth a little bit of a party that MLS is still around and that it will be for quite some time. Let me know in the comments what you think about the future of Major League Soccer, where it fits into the CONCACAF ecosystem, and anything else we touched on in today's Concacast. As I mentioned, a bit MLS-centric as the league gets going this weekend and also enters the CONCACAF Champions Cup this week. Next week, we'll bring you some stories from around the region on the Concacast with John Arnold. Thanks again for joining. Thanks for watching the Concacast with John Arnold. Like I said, I think it helps if you like and subscribe. Love to see the show grow. If you dig it, tell a friend. Thanks again for watching the Concacast with John Arnold. I've been John Arnold. We'll see you next week. I might actually learn to play this thing one day.